The smell of burned flesh had a color in Clay County, Missouri, late 1863, sort of a dirty yellow that hung in the air like something rotten. The border ward turned the frontier into one big graveyard, farms burned to nothing but chimneys, pointing at God like accusing fingers, and the earth itself seemed tired of soaking up blood. Union forces was pressing down hard on anybody who helped the bushwhackers and helping wounded men. Confederate guerrillas bleeding out in your root cellar. Well, that'd get you killed or worse. Sarah Mitchell's farm sat about 3 miles outside Liberty, a little spread of bottomland near Fishing River, where the soil was good and the air was thick with cottonwood seeds come spring. She was 19 years old, couldn't speak a damn word since she was a little girl when some fever took her voice clean away. But what she couldn't say with words, she said with her hands, quick, graceful motions that her mama and daddy understood like language. And what she couldn't say at all, she wrote down on scraps of paper she kept in her apron pocket. Sarah was the kind of woman the border needed more of, gentle but strong, the type who'd nurse a wounded man back to health, whether he wore blue or gray. But out here on the Missouri-Kansas line, mercy was a crime, and Sarah had been committing it regular. When Bill Anderson's men got ambushed near the river back in October, 3 of them made it to the Mitchell farm, bleeding like stuck hogs. Sarah hid 'em in the root cellar, dressed their wounds with torn sheets and whiskey, fed 'em her family's winter stores, and kept 'em alive when they should have died. One of them guerrillas was Jim Anderson, Bill's younger brother, and Jim owed Sarah Mitchell his life. Problem was, somebody talked. Now listen here. Before we go further, hit that like button and subscribe right this minute. 'Cause what happens next is something fierce, and you're gonna want to see how this whole bloody mess ends. Don't go nowhere. Captain Marcus Brennan was the kind of Union officer that made folks wonder if the North was really fighting for anything worth a damn. He'd come out from Cincinnati, lawyer before the war, full of talk about moral righteousness and civilizing the savage border. 2 years in Missouri turned him into something else entirely, something mean and twisted up inside like barbed wire. He was provost marshal for Liberty and the surrounding country, which meant he had power. The kind of power that lets a man forget he's human and start thinking he's God. Brennan kept records, neat little ledgers full of names and crimes. Confederate sympathizer, guerrilla collaborator, harboring enemy combatants. He'd arrested over 60 folks, confiscated dozens of farms, and personally overseen the hanging of 15 traitors, including 2 boys not old enough to shave, whose only crime was having brothers who rode with the bushwhackers. Brennan figured he was bringing civilization to Missouri. What he was really bringing was terror. Word reached him about Sarah Mitchell through one of his informants, some yellow-bellied son of a bitch who'd sell his own mother for Union script. The informant told Brennan that the Mitchell farm was a way station for wounded guerrillas, that Sarah had been nursing rebels back to health, that her root cellar was practically a Confederate hospital. Brennan organized a raid for dawn, 20 soldiers strong, riding out from Liberty like the damn apocalypse. They hit the farm just as the sun was coming up, that cold gray light that makes everything look dead already. By then the guerrillas was long gone. Bill's men never stayed nowhere too long, but Brennan's boys found what they was looking for. Bandages stiff with dried blood, medicine bottles, torn sheets that still smelled like infection and whiskey. Weren't no guerrillas to arrest, which made Brennan madder than hell. Man like that, he needed prisoners to justify the raid, needed scalps to show the district commander he was doing his job. So he decided Sarah Mitchell would do just fine. Brennan had his soldiers drag Sarah out of the house into the yard, her mama screaming, and her daddy trying to fight until a rifle butt to the head put him down. They rounded up the neighbors too, made 'em watch, made 'em see what happened to folks who helped the Confederacy. Sarah tried to run but weren't nowhere to go, not with 20 armed men surrounding the place. She couldn't scream for help, 'cause she couldn't scream at all, could only make these awful sounds like a wounded animal. Brennan stood there in his Union blue, looking down at Sarah like she was dirt on his boots. "You've been harboring enemy combatants," he said, all official-like, as if that made what was coming legal. "That makes you a traitor to the United States of America. And traitors got to be marked so everyone knows what they are." They stripped her to the waist right there in the yard, her mama crying so hard she couldn't breathe, her daddy bleeding from the head wound, but still trying to get to his daughter. 2 soldiers held Sarah's arms, while a third heated an iron in a fire they'd built special for the purpose. The iron had a letter on it, T for traitor, and when it was glowing red hot, Brennan himself took hold of it. The smell of burning flesh is something you don't forget. It's sweet and terrible at the same time, like pork but wrong, and it hangs in the air thick as molasses. Sarah made sounds then that wasn't quite screams but worse somehow. These high, keening noises that came from somewhere deep and hurt to hear. Brennan pressed that iron to her back once, twice, 3 times, branding her like she was livestock. Her skin bubbled and blackened, and the neighbors who was forced to watch turned away or got sick in the dirt. But Brennan wasn't finished, not by a long shot. He had his men burn the Mitchell farmhouse, the barn, the chicken coop. They shot the livestock and left them to rot in the sun. They salted the fields so nothing would grow. And all the while Sarah laid in the dirt with her back raw and smoking, her daddy holding her as best he could, with his own blood running down his face, her mama just rocking back and forth and keening. Before he left, Brennan made sure everyone understood the lesson. "This is what happens to families who nurse rebel scum," he announced, loud enough for all the neighbors to hear. "This is Union justice, remember it." Then he rode back to Liberty, leaving the Mitchells with nothing but ashes and pain, figuring he'd made his point. What Brennan didn't know, couldn't know, was that one of them guerrillas Sarah'd saved was Jim Anderson. And Jim Anderson, soon as he was well enough to ride, was going to find his brother Bill and tell him what happened. And when Bill Anderson heard what had been done to the woman who saved his brother's life, well, Brennan's days of thinking he was God was going to come to a real sudden, real painful end. The border had seen plenty of cruelty by 1863, but what was coming was going to make everything else look like Sunday school. 'Cause Bill Anderson didn't forgive, didn't forget, and sure as hell didn't show mercy to men who tortured defenseless women. Brennan just didn't know it yet, but he was going to learn. Sarah Mitchell's back was a mess of blistered, weeping flesh that looked like raw meat left in the sun. Her mama did what she could with what little they had left: cool water from the creek, strips of cloth torn from the one dress that hadn't burned, whiskey they'd buried in the yard months back. But there weren't no medicine that could touch the kind of pain Sarah was carrying, the kind that went deeper than burned skin and straight into a person's soul. They was living in the root cellar now, the only structure Brennan's bastards hadn't torched. It was damp and dark and smelled like earth and old potatoes, but it kept the rain off, and that was something. Sarah's daddy, Thomas Mitchell, had a concussion from the rifle butt that still made him dizzy and sick. Her mama, Eleanor, aged about 10 years in one morning, her hair gone mostly grey seemingly overnight. But it was Sarah who'd suffered worst, and everyone in Clay County knew it. Word spread fast on the border, always did. Couldn't keep nothing quiet when you had neighbors 3 miles apart, all watching each other, wondering who'd be next. Folks started avoiding the Mitchell place, scared that being seen helping them would bring Brennan down on their own heads. The few who did come, bringing food, old blankets, a jar of salve, did it at night and didn't stay long. Fear was a contagion out here, and Brennan had infected the whole damn county with it. But Brennan wasn't satisfied with making one example. Man like that, he got a taste for cruelty and couldn't seem to get enough of it. 3 days after burning the Mitchell farm, he arrested Margaret Dixon, a widow woman about 40 years old, who ran a boarding house in Liberty. Her crime? She'd rented a room to a man who turned out to be a Confederate courier. Didn't matter that she hadn't known. Didn't matter that she'd cooperated fully when questioned. Brennan confiscated her property, turned her out into the street with nothing but the clothes she was wearing, and added her name to his ledger. Entry Pan 74, female, age 42. Property seized for harboring enemy agents. Then there was Thomas Wheeler, a farmer from down near Fishing River. His 2 sons rode with the bushwhackers, everyone knew it, but Thomas himself was too old and too broken down from rheumatism to fight anybody. Brennan arrested him anyway, figuring the old man might know where his boys was hiding. When Thomas couldn't or wouldn't tell him nothing useful, Brennan had him tied to a post in Liberty's town square and whipped. 20 lashes across his back while folks watched, too scared to intervene. Thomas was 63 years old, and the whipping near about killed him. Brennan let him go afterward, bleeding and barely conscious, with a warning: "Next time I'll hang you." The people of Clay County was learning to hate in ways they hadn't before. It weren't just the normal hate of war, Union versus Confederate, North versus South. This was personal, the kind of hate that burns cold and steady like a well-banked fire. And in every conversation, in every whispered complaint, one name kept coming up: Bill Anderson. Folks was wondering when, not if, but when, Bloody Bill would hear about what was happening in Liberty. Jim Anderson made it to Bill's camp near Blackwater Creek about a week after Sarah had been branded. He was still healing from the wounds Sarah had nursed, still weak enough that the ride near about killed him. But he made it, and when he stumbled into camp looking half dead, Bill knew something bad had happened before Jim even opened his mouth. The camp was set up in a wooded hollow where the creek ran clear and cold, hidden from Union patrols by thick stands of blackjack oak and hickory. Bill's guerrillas, maybe 30 men total, were scattered around in small groups, cleaning weapons, cooking salt pork over low fires, playing cards with greasy decks. When Jim rode in, all that stopped. Archie Clement looked up from sharpening his knife. Jesse James put down the rifle he was oiling, and Frank James stood from where he'd been studying a map of the county. Bill himself was sitting on a fallen log, working on his saddle, his collection of Union scalps hanging from the pommel like some kind of terrible decoration. He was 24 years old, but looked older, his face hard and weathered, his eyes the kind of cold that don't never warm up. When he seen Jim's condition, something flickered across his face. Concern, maybe, or anger, but it was gone, quick as it came. "Jim," Bill said, quiet-like, standing up slow. "What happened?" Jim told the story sitting by the fire with a tin cup of whiskey in his shaking hands. He told about the ambush at Fishing River, about making it to the Mitchell farm more dead than alive, about Sarah hiding them and nursing them and saving their lives. Then he told about coming back. He'd snuck back to check on the Mitchells to thank them proper, and finding nothing but ashes and a family living in a root cellar. He told about Sarah's back, about the brands burned into her flesh, about Brennan and what he'd done. Bill listened without moving, without saying a word, his face like carved stone. But them who knew him, and all these men knew him, they recognized the signs, the absolute stillness, the way his jaw muscles worked, the way his hand drifted unconscious-like to the scalps on his saddle. Bill Anderson's rage was a cold thing, not hot. It didn't explode. It calculated, planned, waited for the perfect moment to strike. When Jim finished talking, there was silence in the camp. Even the fire seemed to burn quieter. Finally Bill spoke, his voice soft, but carrying to every man there. "Sarah Mitchell saved my brother's life. That makes her my responsibility. And what Brennan done to her." He paused, looking around at his men. "That ain't war. That ain't even cruelty. That's something worse. That's a man who thinks his uniform makes him God." Archie Clement grinned, showing teeth. "So we're gonna kill him?" "Oh, we're gonna kill him," Bill said, "but not quick, not easy. Brennan's gonna learn what hell looks like, and it's gonna look like what he done to Sarah. Every bit of it." Cole Younger, leaning against a tree, spoke up. "Brennan's holed up in Liberty Garrison with 20 soldiers. Place is fortified. We can't just ride in and shoot him." "No," Bill agreed, "we can't. So we're going to be smart about it. Frank, I want you to go into Liberty, scout the place, pose as a farmer or something, find out Brennan's routines, his habits when he leaves the garrison, if he leaves at all. Cole, you work the taverns, talk to Union soldiers, buy 'em drinks, learn what you can. Jesse, you and Jim stay here. Jim needs rest. And Jesse, you're going to help me plan this out proper." Dave Poole, silent as always, just nodded. He didn't need instructions. When the time came to kill, he'd be there, efficient and merciless as death itself. But Bill wasn't done. "Before we do anything else, I'm riding to the Mitchell farm. I need to see Sarah, need to see what was done to her with my own eyes. And I need her to know, need her to understand, that what Brennan done ain't gonna stand. Justice is coming, even if I got to burn Liberty to the ground to deliver it." The men stirred, excitement and bloodlust mixing with something else. Respect, maybe, or recognition that Bill's code meant something. He didn't just kill for killing's sake. He killed for reasons, and them reasons mattered. A woman who'd saved his brother's life had been tortured, and that meant war. Not the regular border war they'd been fighting, but something more personal, more final. That night, while the camp slept, Bill sat by the fire staring into the flames. Frank James, keeping watch, saw his commander's face in the firelight and didn't like what he seen there. Bill Anderson was already brutal, everyone knew that. But this was different. This was Bill transforming into something darker, something that scared even his own men. The monster that was always lurking inside him was coming out full force, and God help anyone who got in its way. Come morning, Bill would ride to the Mitchell farm. And after that, Captain Marcus Brennan's days of playing God was numbered. The count was just getting started, and it was going to end in fire and screaming. Bill Anderson rode to the Mitchell place alone, which weren't like him. He usually traveled with at least 2 or 3 men for security. But this was personal, and personal business was best done without witnesses. The November cold was settling in hard, making the burned timbers of the Mitchell farmhouse look even more desolate against the grey sky. Smoke still rose thin from where the root cellar was, where the family was keeping a small fire going for warmth. Sarah was sitting outside when Bill rode up, wrapped in a threadbare blanket, her back too painful to lean against anything. She looked up at him with eyes that was old beyond her 19 years, eyes that had seen things no woman should have to see. She couldn't speak, but she didn't need to. The recognition was there. She knew who he was, knew he was Jim's brother, knew what his coming meant. Bill dismounted slow, keeping his hands visible so as not to spook her. "Miss Mitchell," he said quiet-like, removing his hat. "I'm Bill Anderson, Jim's brother. I came to see you, to see what was done, and to tell you something important." Sarah's mama came out of the root cellar then, protective-like, putting herself between Bill and her daughter. But Sarah touched her mama's arm, shook her head gentle, and pulled out one of her scraps of paper. She wrote quick and showed it to Bill. "I know who you are. Jim told me about you before he left." "Jim told me what you'd done for him," Bill said. "Told me you saved his life, saved 2 other men's lives. Told me what Brennan done to you for it." He paused, his jaw working. "I need to see it. Need to see your back. I know that ain't proper, and I'm sorry for asking, but I need to see what we're avenging." Sarah looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. She stood slow, wincing with pain, and turned her back to him. Her mama helped ease the blanket down. What Bill seen made something inside him go cold and hard as iron. The brands was still raw, weeping, clear fluid. The letter T burned 3 times into her flesh in a triangle pattern. The skin around the burns was red and inflamed, and Bill could smell the infection starting to set in. He'd seen a lot of cruelty in his 24 years, seen men tortured, seen women abused, seen children orphaned and homes burned. But something about Sarah's back, about the deliberate, calculated nature of what Brennan had done, pushed Bill past anger into something colder and more permanent. This weren't just war, this was evil wearing a uniform. "Miss Mitchell," Bill said, his voice tight, "I give you my word, and Anderson's word is iron, that Captain Brennan's going to pay for what he done. He's going to feel every bit of pain he gave you, and then some. Justice is coming, even if it takes me months to deliver it." Sarah wrote again, "Will it help? Will it undo what he did?" Bill considered that, then answered honest, "No, ma'am, it won't. Ain't nothing gonna undo this, but it'll make damn sure he don't do it to nobody else. And it'll show every Union officer in Missouri that there's consequences for torturing innocent women. That's got to count for something." Sarah nodded slow, and Bill seen acceptance in her eyes. Not forgiveness, there weren't no forgiveness possible, but acceptance that vengeance was the only justice the border offered anymore. Bill rode back to camp with Sarah's image burned into his mind deeper than any brand. He gathered his men and laid out the situation plain. Brennan's in Liberty Garrison with 20 soldiers. Place is fortified, gates guarded day and night. We can't take it by direct assault, we'd lose too many men and probably fail, so we're going to be smart about it. Frank James had returned from his scouting mission with detailed information. "Brennan don't leave the garrison no more," Frank reported. "Man's scared. He's holed up in there like a rat in a hole, barely comes outside even for roll call. His men are getting restless, 3 deserted last week, and I heard talk of more fixing to run. They know Anderson's coming for Brennan, and they don't want to die defending him." "Good," Bill said. "Fear's working for us. What about supply lines?" "There's a convoy coming from Kansas City on Thursday," Cole Younger added. He'd been working the taverns like Bill ordered, getting Union soldiers drunk and talkative. Ammunition, food, medical supplies, 30-man escort. It's supposed to arrive at Liberty around dusk. Bill's eyes got that distant look they got when he was planning. That's our way in. We take the convoy, take their uniforms, ride into Liberty looking like reinforcements. They're expecting supplies and soldiers. They'll open the gates for us without thinking twice. Jesse James frowned. That's risky as hell, Bill. If even one man recognizes us, if anyone questions the plan, we're trapped inside a fortified garrison. It's risky, Bill agreed. But it's the only way. Direct assault fails. Siege takes too long. Union reinforcements would arrive before we starved them out. This way, we're inside before they know what's happening. Fast, brutal, final. Archie Clement was grinning again, that crazy grin that made even his friends nervous. I like it. We gonna kill all of them? The soldiers, yeah. They're complicit in what Brennan's done. They had chances to stop him and didn't. But the townspeople of Liberty, we leave alone. This ain't about burning towns. It's about one man and the soldiers who follow his orders. The planning took 2 days. Bill was meticulous, working out every detail, every contingency. They'd ambush the convoy 15 miles outside Liberty, at a place where the road ran through thick timber and the terrain favored guerrilla tactics. They'd kill or scatter the escort, take the uniforms of men their size, reorganize the supply wagons to hide weapons underneath the legitimate cargo. 20 of Bill's best men would make the approach. The rest would stay back as reserve in case things went sideways. Dave Poole would lead the initial ambush. He was the best shot in the band, could drop a man at 300 yards. Frank James would handle the logistics of reorganizing the convoy. Cole Younger, with his gift for talking and his gentleman's bearing, would do the negotiating at Liberty's gates if needed. Archie Clement would be held in reserve until they was inside. Little Archie's bloodlust was useful, but it needed to be controlled, aimed like a weapon. Thursday morning came cold and clear. Bill's men moved into position along the Kansas City road at dawn, hiding in the timber like ghosts. The convoy appeared around noon, 6 wagons, 30 Union cavalry riding escort, all of them looking tired and bored. They wasn't expecting trouble this close to Liberty. That was their first mistake. The ambush was quick and vicious. Dave Poole dropped the lead officer with 1 shot, and then Bill's guerrillas was pouring fire into the convoy from 3 sides. The Union cavalry tried to organize a defense, but there weren't no defense possible against an ambush this well planned. Some of them tried to surrender. Bill let them. Some tried to fight. Dave Poole and the others cut them down. Some tried to run. Jesse James and his group ran them down and shot them from horseback. 15 minutes after it started, it was over. 23 Union soldiers dead, 7 captured and tied up to be left for their own side to find later. Bill's men suffered 1 casualty, a flesh wound to Cole Younger's arm that made him cuss, but didn't slow him down none. Now hold on, make sure you like this video. What's coming next is the reckoning, and it ain't pretty. Bill Anderson's about to deliver hell itself. They stripped the Union dead of uniforms, selecting men who was roughly the same size as the guerrillas who'd be wearing them. Frank James organized the wagons, hiding revolvers and rifles under the legitimate supplies. Bill himself put on a Union captain's uniform taken from the officer Dave Poole had shot. It fit well enough, and the blood on it didn't show much against the dark blue wool. By mid-afternoon they was ready, looking for all the world like a legitimate Union supply convoy. Bill gathered his men for final instructions. Once we're inside, we move fast. Secure the gates first so nobody escapes, then sweep the garrison building by building. Brennan's office is in the main headquarters. That's where I'm headed. I want him alive and conscious. Everyone else, you do what needs doing, but remember, this is about Brennan and his soldiers, not the town. The men nodded, checking their hidden weapons one last time. They was nervous. Even these hardened guerrillas knew this was dangerous, but they trusted Bill's planning. He'd never led them wrong before. As dusk started falling, they approached Liberty. The garrison loomed ahead, Union flags snapping in the cold wind, guards visible on the walls. Bill signaled the convoy forward, keeping his face neutral, playing the role of tired Union captain, bringing much-needed supplies. This was the moment. Either they'd be waved through or they'd die trying to fight their way out of a trap. The gate guard called down, "Identify yourselves." Cole Younger, His arm bandaged but his voice steady, called back, "Captain Morrison's convoy from Kansas City. We got supplies and reinforcements. Open the damn gate. It's cold as hell out here." There was a pause that seemed to last forever. Then, blessed and terrible, the gate started swinging open. The gate swung shut behind them with a sound like a coffin closing, and for one heartbeat everything was still. Union soldiers was moving around the garrison yard, some unloading firewood, others on guard duty, a few heading toward the wagons to help unload supplies. They wasn't expecting nothing wrong. Why would they? This was a Union convoy, wearing Union blue, coming from Kansas City, just like scheduled. Bill gave the signal, a simple nod, and hell came to Liberty Garrison. The guerrillas threw back the canvas coverings on the supply wagons and came up firing. Dave Poole shot the gate guards before they could even turn around. Archie Clement dropped 2 soldiers who was walking toward the headquarters building. Jesse and Frank James opened fire on a group near the stables. The Union men, caught completely flat-footed, scattered like quail, some trying to reach their weapons, others just trying to run and find cover. Bill's men poured out of the wagons like demons. Their disguises dropped, revolvers blazing in both hands. The garrison yard turned into a slaughterhouse, Union soldiers falling, screaming, trying to organize resistance, but finding none possible. This weren't a battle. This was an execution dressed up as combat. Cole Younger and 3 others secured the gates, making damn sure nobody escaped to ride for help. Frank James led a group to clear the barracks, shooting soldiers as they stumbled out, confused and half-dressed. Dave Poole positioned himself on the garrison wall, picking off anyone who tried to make a run for it. In less than 10 minutes it was over. 15 Union soldiers dead, 5 wounded and surrendering, the rest already fled or hiding. Bill himself headed straight for the headquarters building, Archie Clement and Jesse James flanking him. They kicked open the door to find Brennan's office, and there was the captain himself, trying to stuff papers and his precious ledger into a satchel, planning to escape out the back. He looked up when they entered, and the color drained from his face like water from a busted bucket. "Going somewhere, Captain?" Bill asked quiet-like, his voice cold as January ice. Brennan's hand moved toward the pistol on his desk, but Archie's gun was already trained on him. "I wouldn't," Archie said, grinning that terrible grin. "Bill wants you alive, but he didn't say in how many pieces." Brennan's hand froze. He tried to compose himself, tried to find some authority in his voice. "I'm a Union officer. I'm entitled to be treated as a prisoner of war under—" Bill crossed the room in 3 steps and backhanded Brennan across the face hard enough to spin him around and knock him into his desk. "Sarah Mitchell was a civilian," Bill said, his voice still quiet, but carrying something dark and final. "Did she get prisoner protections? Did she get a trial? Did she get mercy?" Brennan's nose was bleeding, and his eyes was wide with fear now, all that authority gone. "I was following orders. She was harboring enemy combatants. It's my duty to—" "Your duty," Bill interrupted, "was to be a man. You failed." He nodded to Jesse, who grabbed Brennan and dragged him to a chair, binding his hands behind his back with rawhide cord pulled tight enough to cut into skin. Brennan tried to struggle, but Jesse was young and strong, and Brennan was soft from garrison duty. Bill picked up Brennan's ledger from where it had fallen, flipping through the pages. His face got darker with each entry he read. Entry 73. Sarah Mitchell, female, age 19, branded for treason, property destroyed. He looked up at Brennan. "You wrote this like it was nothing, like she was livestock." "She was a traitor," Brennan shouted, trying to find some conviction. "She helped rebels. She nursed wounded men," Bill said. "That's all. She didn't fight, didn't spy, didn't kill nobody. She was a healer, and you tortured her for it." He set the ledger down, gentle-like, and began removing his gun belt. "I'm going to tell you how this ends, Captain. You're going to write a confession. Every farm you burned, every person you tortured, every atrocity you committed. You're going to sign it, and then you're going to pay for what you done to Sarah Mitchell." Brennan's eyes went to the fireplace where a branding iron was heating. Bill had prepared this, had planned every detail. The terror that crossed Brennan's face was beautiful in its completeness. "No," he whispered. "No, you can't." "I can," Bill said, "and I will. You branded a defenseless woman 3 times, so you're gonna get branded. But not 3 times, Captain. You're gonna get 1 brand for every letter in a word I picked out special. The word is traitor to humanity. That's 19 letters, Brennan. 19 burns. Brennan started struggling then, really struggling, but the rawhide cord held fast. Please, he begged, all his dignity gone now, reduced to nothing but fear. Please, I'll give you money. I'll resign my commission. I'll leave Missouri and never come back. Just don't. Sarah begged too, Bill said quiet. But she couldn't use words, could she? Couldn't plead for mercy because you'd taken her voice years before you ever met her. All she could do was make sounds, terrible sounds that her mama had to hear. So your begging don't move me none. Bill forced Brennan to write the confession first, holding a knife to his throat while Archie guided his hand across the paper. Brennan's handwriting was shaky, but it was legible. Detailed descriptions of farms burned without cause, civilians tortured for information they didn't have, prisoners executed without trial. When he was done, Bill made him sign it and date it. Then Bill folded it careful and put it in his coat pocket. Now, Bill said, pulling the first branding iron from the fire, we get to the justice part. They stripped Brennan's shirt off and tied him face down across his own desk, arms and legs bound tight. The captain was crying now, actually crying, snot running down his face, begging in a voice that had gone high and broken. Please, God, please, I'm sorry, please don't do this. You should have thought about that, Bill said, before you put hot iron to a 19-year-old girl's back. The first brand, the letter T, made Brennan scream loud enough to be heard across the garrison yard. The smell of burning flesh filled the office, that same sweet, terrible smell that had hung over the Mitchell farm. Bill held the iron steady, making sure the burn was deep, making sure it had scar permanent. Then he set that iron back in the fire and took up another one. R came next, right below the first burn. Brennan was screaming continuously now, his voice going hoarse, his body convulsing against the ropes. Archie watched with something like awe on his face. He'd seen Bill angry before, but this was different. This was cold, methodical, surgical. This was justice being carved into flesh, 1 letter at a time. Joyce Brennan vomited from the pain, choking on his own sick. He started praying, babbling about God and mercy and forgiveness. His prayers dissolved into animal sounds, wordless and desperate. Oh, he begged Bill to just shoot him, to end it quick. Bill didn't respond, just kept working, kept branding. Brennan's screams had gotten quieter now, his voice destroyed. He was going into shock, body trembling, uncontrollable like, oh! Tears and snot and vomit covering his face. By the time Bill got to humanity, Brennan was barely conscious, his back a mass of charred, blistered flesh that had never healed right. But Bill finished the job, every letter burned deep and permanent. When it was done, he threw water on Brennan to wake him up, to make sure he was aware for what came next. You're gonna live through this part, Bill said, hauling Brennan upright. You're gonna be conscious and aware. I want you to know exactly what's happening. They dragged Brennan outside into the garrison yard, where Bill's guerrillas had rounded up the surviving Union soldiers and a few townspeople who'd come to see what the shooting was about. Bill had them build a pyre in the center of the yard, wood from the garrison stores, kerosene from the lamps. Then he had Brennan tied to a post in the middle of it all. Brennan was past begging now, past anything but animal fear. His back was a ruin, blood and clear fluid seeping through the burns. His face was grey with shock and pain, but his eyes were still aware, still understanding what was about to happen. Bill stood before him, holding the confession where everyone could see. This man, he announced loud enough for all to hear, tortured a 19-year-old girl who couldn't speak to defend herself, branded her like livestock, burned her home. This is his confession in his own handwriting of that crime and dozens more like it. This is Union justice written plain. Now you're going to see Missouri justice. He poured kerosene over Brennan, soaking him thorough. The captain made sounds, not quite screams anymore, more like whimpers. But Bill wasn't listening. He was remembering Sarah's back, remembering the brands burned into her flesh, remembering that she'd only been trying to save lives. Sarah Mitchell can't speak because God took her voice, Bill said, striking a match. The flame looked small and harmless in the growing darkness. You can speak. Use it to beg. Maybe God'll answer. I ain't gonna. Brennan did beg then, his voice a broken whisper. Please, I'm sorry, God forgive me, please. Bill dropped the match. The kerosene caught with a whoosh, flames racing up Brennan's body. His screams, his real screams, started then, high and terrible and animal. They went on longer than seemed possible, Brennan writhing against the ropes as the fire consumed him. The smell was horrific, burning flesh and hair and cloth all mixed together. Some of the watching townspeople turned away or got sick. Even some of Bill's men looked uncomfortable. But Bill watched it all, his face expressionless, until Brennan's screams finally stopped, and there was nothing left but fire and smoke and the smell of death. When it was over, Bill turned to the survivors, Union soldiers and townspeople both. Brennan's confession stays here, nailed to the garrison gate. Anyone who wants to read it can read it. See what your Union Army does to innocent people. And know this, any other officer who tortures civilians will answer to me the same way. There's consequences now. Remember that. Then Bill and his guerrillas mounted up and rode out, leaving Liberty Garrison burning against the night sky, leaving Brennan's confession flapping in the wind for Union reinforcements to find come morning, leaving a message written in fire and blood that the border wouldn't soon forget. The ride back to Blackwater Creek was quiet, the kind of quiet that settles on men after they've done something that can't be undone. Bill's guerrillas didn't celebrate, didn't whoop or holler like they usually did after a successful raid. What they'd witnessed in Brennan's office and in that garrison yard, that weren't normal warfare. That was something darker, something that sat heavy in a man's gut, even when it was justified. Dave Poole rode near the back of the column, his face pale as creek stones. He'd taken a bullet during the garrison fight, clean through the side, below the ribs, and the bleeding wouldn't stop proper. Frank James kept checking on him, offering water and whiskey, but Dave just shook his head and kept riding. Guerrillas didn't complain about wounds, not when there was distance to cover and Union patrols that might be following. 2 days later, Dave Poole died in camp. The wound had festered, infection spreading through his body faster than any medicine could stop it. He went quiet-like, the way he'd lived, didn't cry out, didn't thrash, just closed his eyes and stopped breathing. Bill presided over the burial in an unmarked grave near the creek, saying words that surprised them all for their gentleness. Dave Poole never questioned, never hesitated, never failed us. He was a bushwhacker, and there ain't no higher honor on this border. The war took him, same as it's taken so many, we remember. They filled in the grave and rode on. That was the cost of vengeance. It always took blood, both the enemy's and your own. News of liberty spread faster than wildfire in dry grass. Union reinforcements arrived at the garrison 2 days after Bill's raid, finding the place still smoldering, Brennan's charred remains tied to a post, and his confession nailed to the gate. The officer who read that confession, a major from Kansas City, reportedly vomited afterward. The detailed descriptions of torture, the casual way Brennan had documented his atrocities, the sheer number of civilians he'd brutalized, it was all there in his own handwriting, signed and dated. The Union District Commander tried to suppress the confession, tried to keep it quiet, but copies had already been made. Newspapers in St. Louis and Kansas City got hold of it. Northern papers called it Confederate propaganda, but folks on the border knew better. They'd lived through Brennan's tenure. They knew every word was true. Several provost marshals quietly resigned their commissions in the weeks that followed. Others requested transfers to Eastern theaters, suddenly eager to fight Robert E. Lee instead of Missouri bushwhackers. The ones who stayed became noticeably more careful about how they treated Confederate sympathizers. Bill Anderson's message had been received loud and clear. Torture civilians, and you'll answer for it in ways that make death look merciful. Sarah Mitchell heard about liberty from neighbors who came in the night, bringing the news like they was bringing a gift. Her reaction was complicated, relief mixed with something darker, satisfaction mixed with horror. Her mama asked if she felt better, if knowing Brennan was dead brought peace. Sarah wrote on her paper, "It doesn't undo what he did, but it means he can't do it to anyone else. That matters." Thomas Mitchell, his concussion finally healed, started rebuilding the farm with help from neighbors who'd been too scared to help before. Brennan's death had freed something in Clay County. Folks wasn't so afraid anymore, wasn't so quick to look away when their neighbors needed help. The fear Brennan had cultivated died with him in those flames. Bill visited the Mitchell farm one more time, about 3 weeks after Liberty. Sarah was outside working, moving slow because her back still pained her, but working nonetheless. She looked up when Bill dismounted, and there was understanding in her eyes. She didn't need to speak, and Bill didn't need to hear words. They both knew what had been done, and why, and what it cost. Bill handed her a leather pouch heavy with coins, gold taken from the Liberty garrison. "This won't rebuild what Brennan destroyed," he said, "but it'll help. And it's his money, so there's justice in that too." Sarah took the pouch and wrote, "Thank you. Not just for this, for everything." Bill nodded, putting his hat back on. "You saved my brother's life, Miss Mitchell. That makes you family, and I protect family." He paused, looking at the burned foundations of her home. "What Brennan done to you was evil. What I done to him, I ain't sure that was good, but it was necessary. Sometimes that's all the justice the border offers, necessary, even when it ain't good." Sarah wrote one more message and showed it to him. "Will you be okay?" Bill smiled, but it was a sad smile, the kind that don't reach the eyes. "No, ma'am, I don't reckon I will, but that ain't your burden to carry. You heal up, rebuild your life, and remember that sometimes the devil does God's work, even if God don't claim him afterward." He rode away then, and Sarah Mitchell never saw Bill Anderson again. But she heard about him, everyone on the border heard about him. His raids got bloodier, his reputation darker. The monster that Liberty had brought fully to the surface never went back in. Bill Anderson fought for another year before Union soldiers killed him in an ambush. He was 24 years old, already a legend, already a ghost story mothers told to scare their children. But Sarah also heard the other stories, about farms Bill's raiders spared, about women Bill protected, about civilians who owed their lives to his intervention. The legend was complicated, like the man himself. Monster and protector, devil and avenger, all twisted up together until you couldn't separate one from the other. Years later, after the war ended and Missouri tried to heal its wounds, Sarah Mitchell wrote her memoir. She was an old woman by then, her branded back hidden beneath high-collared dresses, her silence never broken. In that memoir, she wrote about Bill Anderson not as a hero. She was too honest for that, but as a necessary devil in a time when devils ruled the earth. She wrote, "Without Anderson's vengeance, women like me would have had no voice, no protection, no justice in a system designed to crush us. What he did to Captain Brennan was terrible, but what Brennan did to me and to dozens of others was worse. Anderson gave us something the law never would, acknowledgement that our suffering mattered, that our lives had value worth defending. I cannot call him good, but I cannot call him evil either. He was what the border made him, and we needed what he became." The Missouri-Kansas border war claimed over 10,000 lives before it ended. Bill Anderson was responsible for hundreds of them. History remembers him as the most brutal bushwhacker of the Civil War, a man who made vengeance an art form and turned Liberty Garrison into a funeral pyre. Union soldiers feared him more than Confederate armies. His name became synonymous with merciless violence. But to people like Sarah Mitchell, to the civilians he protected even as he destroyed himself, Bill Anderson was something else, proof that even in war's darkest hours, someone would stand against those who preyed on the defenseless. His methods was terrible, his violence was extreme, but his code, protect the innocent, punish those who harm them. That code meant something on a frontier where law had failed and mercy had died. Well, there you have it, folks. Subscribe if you ain't already. And tell me down in the comments where you watching from and what you think about what Anderson done. Was it justice or was it murder? Was he a devil or a protector? Let's hear it. I want to know what you reckon. On quiet nights in Missouri, when the wind howls through Liberty's old streets, locals still tell the story of the mute woman who couldn't speak for herself, and the guerrilla who spoke for her in fire and blood. They tell about Captain Brennan, who thought his uniform made him God, and learned too late that the devil don't respect rank. They tell about Bill Anderson, who burned so bright and died so young, leaving behind a legacy written in smoke and ash. And they remember Sarah Mitchell, who survived when survival should have been impossible, who rebuilt when everything was ashes, who lived long enough to tell her story in her own words, written words, since speaking was forever denied her. Her memoir ended with these lines. The war ended. The guerrillas died or disappeared, but the scars remain, on my back, in Missouri's soil, in the memories of everyone who lived through those terrible years. We survived because men like Anderson made survival possible, even as they damned themselves to do it. I cannot forgive what he became, but I will always be grateful that he existed. The border remembers, the land remembers, and somewhere in the Missouri hills, where the wind carries echoes of old violence and older justice, Bill Anderson's legend endures, complicated, terrible, necessary, and true.